all of these fine folks had a direct experience in one of our field academies, which was going to Mo'orea. And the purpose of this morning's discussion, which is what it is, it's a moderated discussion, is to give all of you a sense of the importance of field work and the importance of firsthand experience, but also understanding how this type of work relates to the issues of sustainability that we've been discussing throughout this week. So I want to take a very quick moment just to introduce you down the line, because it's a mixture of teachers and students and experts from the field, and that set the stage for this particular field academy in Mo'orea. So I'm going to start on the far end and let you introduce yourselves.
Hi, most of you know me. I'm Cosma. I just graduated.
From where?
From
Good morning, Greg Drossel, Assistant Dean of Students, Dean of the Senior Class, Archery Instructor, and Naturalist. I don't do windows.
Hi, I'm Marie Maciak, Ross Institute Media Team, and I was on the trip as the filmmaker to document the process.
Hello, I'm David Lichwater, and I'm a photographer, and I was on assignment in Mo'orea for Smithsonian Magazine, and then continuing some work that's in association with a project that was started with National Geographic Magazine, and that's where I met the Ross students and was able to spend time with you all there.
Our field expert, one of them. Deborah?
Deborah McCall. I'm working on curriculum for the Institute now, and I was on the Mo'orea trip working on the cultural history curriculum.
I'm Alexis Martino. I'm Dean of Media Studies, and I was working with kids and all the media elements, and yeah.
Hi, I'm Julian Alvarez. I just graduated Ross this year like Cosma, and I was lucky enough to attend the trip.
Excellent. And then we have one other person who is on the trip with us, and that is Liam Cummings, who's in the audience, who we might draw upon for questions as well. So Liam, just kind of raise your hand. Liam is currently going into a senior year at Ross and is a member of the Innovation Lab as well, and has a special affinity for marine sciences, among other things. So, excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to try to guide this conversation to give you an overall view of what the field academy experience was in Mo'orea, but also tying out the interdisciplinary relationships and how this particular experience goes beyond just the experience the students had in the field. And when I say goes beyond the experience in the field, I mean on the front end as well as the back end, and where do those tendrils still continue to pull us out? Because I think that's the important piece that we want to capture through this conversation. To begin, we're going to watch a short video, and this was a video that I'm going to ask Marie to introduce in terms of its conception and where it was then used afterwards. Because again, for those of you who are not familiar with our field academy, and just to unpack some terminology because we have a lot of vernacular at Ross, for those of you who have heard about M-term in the past or winter intersession in the past, all of that is now field academy. And it's the idea of taking to the field, whatever that field might be, to engross yourselves in deep studies about a topic of interest or a topic of need or a sense of urgency to learn something and apply information. So Field Academy wraps that all together. So Maria, can you speak a little bit about the production of this particular film in terms of not only what it will show us, but then also what it was used for in terms of working with others outside of Ross?
Okay. This film was presented at Oxford University to scientists who are working on a project called IDEA, and that's Island Digital Ecosystem Avatar, where they are planning to start modeling the ecosystem of the island with all the data that's being collected. So it gives a little bit of a background of systems at Ross and then presents the work that was done afterwards.
Great.
The Ross Spiral curriculum centers on cultural history, which unfolds chronologically through the grades. Each discipline is integrated with the cultural history narrative. Together, they provide a cohesive, interdisciplinary, and global curriculum.
The Ross School was one of the first places to really understand the implications of a digital universe, of universal connectedness, of global connectedness.
Using systems thinking to analyze the dynamic relationships between disciplines, students develop critical and innovative thinking, essential 21st century skills.
At the Ross School, we're taught to look at different systems.
Systems thinking, a new way of thinking about world cultural history, current events, and the systems that we live in, using the metaphors of complex dynamical systems theory.
Ralph Abraham taught us each individual part of a system is a node that's linked to each other by some kind of connecting factor.
The Ross Field Academy traveled to Mo'orea in French Polynesia, where we used systems thinking as part of our project.
Not only were we looking at biodiversity, we were also looking at culture and the interconnectedness of these two systems.
We're on Mo'orea. You guys excited to be here? Yeah! Let's hear it. All right.
How do we bring it all together to understand a whole functioning system? So we have this initiative which we call the Mo'orea Island Digital Ecosystem Avatar, which is to build a computational model of the island, starting at the genome, at the molecular level, right up to processes that are happening on a planetary scale.
The scale we were working with was 1 cubic foot, the BioCube.
So tomorrow through Sunday, we're going to be doing this BioCube program.
How do you show the diversity of life? So the idea was that this, 1 cubic foot would theoretically be a manageable sample size. It's like a human scale. The idea is to find a place where we find the most life in an area only this big.
We are snorkeling and trying to find a place for the BioCube. The most ideal place for a BioCube is definitely somewhere with a lot of diversity.
The site selection is actually really kind of critical because you guys are going to be invested in that site as a representation of the whole.
Well, we've been out for a few hours trying to find a good space for our BioCube. The current's really strong, so it was really hard to stay in one place. But we finally found a spot with lots of life and algae, and so we're leaving it alone for a little bit, and then we're going to check on the GoPros later to see what went through there.
Who is on cube removal? Who's a photographer? All right. So you go in first.
What I'm going to be doing is taking all of the algae around our cube and putting it into these bags separately so that everything is organized, and so it's easier to bring all the smaller things back to the boat.
Well, we don't know what's in here yet, but hopefully there's a lot of animals in here.
The other two groups just arrived with theirs, and they're trying to find little creatures.
Water. So what you're doing now is Morpho Sorting, breaking your specimens up into different groups. Then start breaking them into individual species. So is this individual the same as that individual?
If there's no more sea urchins.
Once you have your individual morpho species, then you bring that type across the street to the BioCode lab, and we'll ID it and start moving things into photography.
I am trying to find the species of the Vermeidae of this snail. You have to look at the special markings that separate it from other organisms. What are these things?
Do you know where the white balance is on a Nikon? Put it out of the way. Leave it in the dish, but just up against the side. Oh, just like that. Now he's like coming right out. Okay, go again. Okay, great. Let's check it. Oh, it's beautiful. Okay, we got that one. We have so many specimens. We got to move on.
That went on until about 3 a.m. Right now, each of the groups are creating a presentation for the elders about our particular BioCube.
Just within our 1 cubic foot of reef, we found 184 different species.
Here are some pictures of what we found.
We are concerned about our future and the future of our reef. There are so many challenges, invasive species, acidification. She said there's a big difference between 20 years ago and now. Now the reef is naked. The health of the reef has changed. Some of the coral has died after big hurricane. All our way of life has evolved. What is affecting really? How do the system works?
The elders in Mo'orea were so connected to the environment.
Really gave me a new perspective and inspires me to be more sustainable.
When you get out into the field and actually do the work, you could see things and feel them. You use more of your senses. We were working with National Geographic and Smithsonian. Any question you had could be answered, which just kept you going, kept you asking questions.
Yeah, it was just an amazing opportunity to have somebody there who is so fascinated by something, and it makes you really fascinated by the same topic.
Our group had 184 different species in 1 cubic foot of space.
Even that 1 cubic foot is a system in itself.
I think it's really great for younger students to begin learning about biodiversity and their impact that they can have, because they're coming into a time where this is going to be really crucial for us and for our planet. We went to the BioBlitz in San Francisco, which was through National Geographic.
So this is our booth. And there's tons of booths set up here.
And we are telling people about our project and everything that we've been doing.
Can you guess what size this actually was?
And we've been showing them our field kits and our game that we designed.
Our booth is very popular. People love our game. It's very easy to learn and it's easy for the kids to catch on.
We made this game and it's called Reef Impact. You get cards and these cards are the impact cards. So they show how something will impact your deck of cards. The typhoon would be something that's negative. It's a natural disaster that hurts the animals that are on the reef.
And the great thing about the research that we're doing is it doesn't require really high-tech equipment. It's just like spoons, cups, and 1 cubic foot.
So it's not just for the water, it can be anywhere.
It can be anywhere.
So cool.
Thank you.
The next step would be tagging species on a more micro level, which is looking at the DNA and their individual relationships with each other. I'm looking forward to that.
We had a very scientific viewpoint while we were in the field doing hands-on scientific work, and to also get more traditional knowledge. Everything is a big system, everything is interconnected from the people into the environment. So it's important that we as humans are responsible in protecting these reefs.
So that gives you an overall contextualization from the perspective of why this is important and why it's part of this week's program. I think if you listen to the movie, some of the things that you've heard about within that context, that gives framework to why we thought it was important to showcase today's issues of biodiversity, issues having to do with sustainability on a large scale, systems thinking and action, simple equipment to have powerful expression of learning and understanding, students working alongside experts, students working alongside natives, students being immersed in a culture that's not one like their own, but then being able to make relationships back to maybe where they live, and then also the power of education in general. So it seemed like it was a fitting way to end the week to share how currently Ross School, and many of you do this on the M-terms you've done too, have the ability to affect change through the power of doing. So I want to take it a little bit further for a second, and I'm going to ask David, if you don't mind, to start off, to answer the question about why, in this case, why Mo'orea from your standpoint as a field investigator, and then as a follow-up to that, how did your experience change, having been in Mo'orea once before, but now doing it with students?
Okay. I was, trying to do this magazine piece about how much life you can find in 1 cubic foot. And there was a long list of about 12 different habitat types, and a coral reef was one of them. And so I called Nancy Knowlton at the Smithsonian, who's a coral reef expert, and she'd written a paper about that they'd found 1,000 creatures in a Passalipora coral head. Well, Passalipora is, maximum 8 to 10 inches, would fit nicely in a 1 cubic foot. So I called her up and she said, you really need to go to a place where they've already been studying it for a while. Because if you go to a new place and you make this collection, you're never going to be able to get the species identified. Because so much of that, coral reef marine invertebrates are, it's the frontier of taxonomy. So I tried to go to a place in Australia, Heron Island, but could never work out the schedule. And it was frustrating, and I had a deadline, and so I called Nancy back and said, the first place you sent me, it's not working out. And she said, just a minute. She walked down the hall, talked to Chris Meyer. 10 minutes later, we had a deal. Because he was working, so I was eavesdropping on the Mo'orea BioCode project, which was perfect, because they were already doing it. They were doing a biological survey of the island of Mo'orea and its surrounding water. And the resolution they were after was, to species, not to genus or some larger group, which a lot of surveys can only afford to go to the larger groups. So went there for 2 weeks. It's only 1 cubic foot. I mean, how long is it going to take? Well, 2 weeks turned into a month, and my dirty little secret about all of my 1 cubic foots is I've never finished one of them. 4 people focused on a little piece of the world for a month, and we still don't finish. World experts, and I'm supposed to be pretty good at my job by now. Have like 30 years of practice. So that focused thing, and having a whole month to do it, and then how it changes with students, it's utter chaos. We have 3 days to do what the last time I tried it took a month. And we're going to try to do 4 of them, because we got to split the group. We got 20 students. Can't have 2. You can't put 20 people around around 1 cube. It's not very interesting for the guys in the back. So it was this lovely, everybody got to get their hands. It's very funny, with Chris and I or some other scientists that I'm working with. Basically, we go out and we play in the dirt for a couple of days and bring it back and sort it out in the lab and, get the microscopes out and then just keep sorting through it. And it is a wonderful privilege to just be able to see how cool the world is. And it was great to be able to share that.
Great. Thank you. So, Deborah, in terms of getting students ready for a trip such as this, can you speak a little bit from your standpoint of how do you prepare students for an immersive experience such as this one? And from your standpoint, and then I'll ask Alexis and Marie and Greg to chime in a minute too after Deborah, what is it that was paramount for you to have students prepared with to be able to make the most of this experience?
Mm-hmm. Well, in thinking of constructing this curriculum, we thought about it in terms of pre-production, production there, and then post-production. And with regard to pre-production, the idea was, okay, let's teach it the way we teach the spiral curriculum. So the first thing we did was we brought up Google Earth and we started where we are, and we turned it around, and here we are. And all you see is water. That's pretty remarkable. And where is it that we're going? Hold on. And here we go, into Mo'orea, this little tiny island. So just looking at that vastness of this ocean around this island, it arose a lot of questions. So from where did these people come? That was a big question. So then we looked at the whole idea of the Lapita culture and learned that actually about 1500 BCE, people came out of Taiwan, Southeast Asia, and started moving eastward. So the whole idea was we started, okay, geographically, and then we looked at migration, early peoples. And then from there, we did the usual Ross thing, was we moved into myth and spiritual practice. And then governance. So we looked at the clans and the Mo'orea tribe and the kings. And then we moved to the European explorers, colonization, French annexation that happened in the 1800s, the kind of exoticization of the other, nuclear testing that took place here. We studied archipelagos as well. We looked at the geology, archipelago and atolls, and then we looked at the impact of the nuclear testing between 1970s and the 1990s, 193 nuclear tests, which created immense destruction, not only in the ocean around the islands, including tsunamis, but also cancer, high rates of cancer in the population. And the fact that while these people were colonized under the French, they could no longer speak their language. When Christian missionaries came, people had to dress immediately, wearing Mother Hubbard dresses. Women, instead of being bare-breasted and dancing, they were no longer permitted to dance. And they had to wear these kind of Christian missionary gowns. And they could no longer speak their language. And up until recently, students were taken away from their parents and made to go to French schools and not taught in their traditional ways. So we learned about a renaissance that occurred in the 70s with this man, Hero, who was a poet who studied in France and came back and began to resurrect the arts and the culture of Polynesia. And then that moved to wayfinding, which we'll talk about in a second. So it was really a kind of spiral of history in the Ross style up to where we are now, and looking at biodiversity.
So before I make the transition over to Alexis, again, just for those of you who are thinking about, how does this apply to you? One of the important parts about all of our Field Academy experiences is trying to give back to our own community. So listening to what Deborah's talking about and understanding the ties to curriculum at other age levels is part of this. It's not just the experience for the students that are going on the trip, but how do you actually capture that experience to enrich the curriculum and to share it back with others of the community across the different grade levels. So Alexis, from your standpoint, what was really important for students to be prepared with to be able to take advantage of this opportunity?
Well, we looked at a lot of different things. One thing that we looked at current photographers and some of the portraiture work that they've done with other tribes and people. We've talked a lot about how can you photograph people and still, do it in a, not polite way, but do it in a conscious way. We did a lot of Photoshop prep. We did a lot of computer prep. We had enormous amount of cameras, GoPros, regular cameras, so it was a lot of technical stuff simultaneously. But it was really talking about, taking the picture. We ended up not doing as much people, we did a lot of cultural experiences, but we did photograph, and David really ran all the species pictures, and I was just there as added support. When we came back, though, I know I'm jumping, we did a ton of Photoshop and we continued to print. And if some of you saw the show, we had a huge amount of little tiny species next to our children as species and had a big exhibition.
Thank you. So Marie, what about from your standpoint in terms of film?
Well, I think one of the important things about these trips is to also talk about the complex relationship of tourist and local community. Tourism and ethnography and documentary filmmaking is often seen as a colonial endeavor. Someone coming in from the outside, filming participating in cultural experiences that may be commodified, sold, and having students understand the complexity of that relationship in terms of, what are these interactions, what is the kind of behind the scenes of these interactions, and how do you behave in a way that is sensitive to the local culture and are very aware of what is happening around you. So these were important discussions in preparation to going to Mo'orea.
Thank you. Greg, as a naturalist?
You really don't know what you're going to find. I mean, I started researching a lot of David's work. We all know what a seagull is, and we all know what a fish is, but what we're really going to find within this 1 cubic foot, years ago when I started this little naturalist program that I do for this summer camp, we did kind of a similar thing, not as intense as David, but scooping up mud from the bottom of a pond and just letting it settle and seeing the diversity. And then how do the people that live there look at all of these species and how it affects their lives? Like yesterday with that winged snail that you showed, how it just steps down and starts to break down a whole system, and how we're part of that system. And what scares me is, in a lot of the wildlife lectures and all I used to do before I came here, and I still do some, we're a part of that. And who's the next species to become extinct? And we tend to encroach on our own habitat. And this is something that we really have to address. A lot of it, like David said yesterday, it's beyond the point of return, but we can stop it or at least slow it down and pay a little more attention to what we do on a daily basis, how that affects our children and our grandchildren. And it was amazing to talk to the elders down there. And I remember standing on the ferry and looking at Mo'orea just jutting out of the ocean. And the first thing I thought was Jurassic Park. How cool, we're gonna see a dinosaur. We didn't see a dinosaur. We saw so much more. And I would sit and I was probably a bit of a pain that David made, but I was amazed just to sit there and watch that whole process and then have that conversation with the elders and living in this beautiful natural world and hearing people say, oh, it's not even close to what it used to be 20 years ago. What did it look like 20 years ago? What will it look like in 20 years if we don't take stock in what we're doing?
Thank you. So to add a little bit of context to that, I was from the outside looking in. I had a lot of background roles for this term, where we get called into many places, but to just give some contextual reference, this happened with great support from experts in the field. So David mentioned Chris Myers, who also works for the Smithsonian Education Division. You know, he's a scientist there. He goes out on missions all the time. It was supported by UC, University of California, Berkeley's Gump Station, which is a marine station in Mo'orea with scientists that are there. So our students are actually getting involved in an ongoing project. When Mrs. Ross learned about this, learned about the work that was happening with the Mo'orea biocode on her boat trip that she did to the area, to the French Polynesians, it became more than just learning about biological diversity or looking at the biodiversity of the area and cataloging that, which was equally as important to get, and I think it was well said by the folks in the Chasing Ice movie, that the work that David has done and now that our students have contributed to gives a snapshot in time of where we are with understanding the biodiversity of that island, knowing full well that perhaps in 20 to 40 to 50 years, that's going to change, for better or for worse. That has the possibility of changing. So it gives that record at that point. But the other piece that was very important to Mrs. Ross was the connection back to the actual indigenous culture of the area. Understanding how do the people that are living there now and who have lived there over time, and I think Deborah brought up in terms of myths and origins and the stories, that oral tradition, and more importantly, the generative knowledge of science, the practical knowledge of science, to make a connection between the scientific world as you and I think about it and the surveys that are done, back to the very people that live on the island and their relationship to nature, and how do you take that wisdom and that knowledge and marry it to this database of genetic coding. And so that's a very important piece of this. It's trying to have preservation of both. So I want to ask our student.
I just wanted to mention something. I mean, I haven't heard a lot this week about cultural survival, but this is a huge issue. And UNESCO now recognizes something that they describe as intangible culture, such as the rituals of a culture, the dancing, the drumming. And that has now become part of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, that it's a human right to preserve culture, and it's actually a necessity. And cultures, these kinds of intangible, cultural intangibles are inextricably linked to the environment. If the environment goes, so do these things.
Right. Yeah. So I want to ask the students, because you were thrown into this. You might have had an idea of what you're going to, but I would like you to take just a moment, if you could, to maybe share briefly what was the experience like from your viewpoint of marrying this really intense BioCube survey analysis with the relationship with the elders and the students that participated with you too. Can you talk a little, and the students, I should say, the Polynesian students that were with you as well, can you talk about what you learned from that experience, what you took away from as a result of that?
I mean, to begin with, I was a bit hesitant going to Mo'orea because I'm not the strongest science student. As soon as I got there, that all changed. I was so fascinated by everything that was going on. And on top of that, we got to experience, the real culture, to every day taking dance classes with these people that were just so sweet and welcoming. And then on top of that, we get to meet students a bit younger than us, but still that we can relate to. I speak French, so it was quite easy for me to communicate with these students because most of them spoke French and as their first language, and then they were learning Tahitian. So, I mean, just being able to speak with kids who are growing up there is really amazing. And then, obviously, with the natives, they have this outlook on nature that's quite different from the ones that we're looking at. I mean, they look at the land in quite a poetic way. They have this relation that's really deep down, and they care for it so much. And to see that is quite beautiful, because I think one of the greatest things that happened on this trip was to see everybody in complete awe of things that we don't really realize every day.
Great, thank you. How about you, Jillian?
I'd have to agree with Cosma. Coming into the trip, I was extremely excited, but also extremely nervous. I knew sort of what I was getting into. I knew that we were going to be doing a lot of things, a lot of different fields, and it's kind of intimidating, knowing that you're going to meet these masters of their field, these scientists, these great photographers. But everyone we met, Chris, Seabird, David, and Zach, they were all extremely humble and kind and really approachable, and offered a lot of help, and really, you ended up forming a personal relationship with them that really helped out on the trip. And it's one thing learning about what dances were performed there, what songs were sung, but it's very important, I think, to actually learn them and actually perform them yourself. So every day we were at the cultural center, learning the dances for 3 hours at a time, learning the rhythms, learning the songs. And actually, when you asked me to come join this panel, I was thinking like all these different things that I was learning, what I learned on the trip, and I was thinking about the songs that we sung, and particularly the hitoto. And I didn't even think about it. Oh yeah, the hitoto is in the top there. Yeah. That's the rhythms that you sing it to. And I was thinking about it, and I hadn't thought about it for months, and I remembered all the lines to it. So it's just something that's sort of like ingrained in me now, and it was a fantastic experience.
Right. So the takeaway from that, to go back to some of the conversations we had before, is that ability to be able to immerse and to immerse deeply, and to understand not just because you read about it or because you saw a movie, but the ability to embrace it wholly. And I think I give you all a lot of credit. It took a lot of courage to embody yourself within this cultural context. So to move it to the next step of trying to think about this a little bit in terms of the information gathered, students were involved in a variety of workshops every day. And I know from looking at blogs some really late nights, but that went across an interdisciplinary lens. So working really intensely on learning how to do site preparation for a BioCube and collecting information, gathering it, analyzing it, documenting it, dancing, singing, learning about some of the ancient traditions of the time. So I would like, if possible, if one of you, and then I think Maria, I'll ask you again, to set us up for the next video. Can you talk a little bit how this experience came about in terms of learning about navigation and wayfaring, and then maybe Deborah, you can talk a little bit about the cultural relevance of it, and then we'll watch a quick movie on this one as well. So.
We did a day-long workshop that was organized by the Atitia Center with the Fafayette double-hull canoe called a va'a. That's in Tahitian. I think in Hawaiian it's vaka. What's really incredible is we had children, as Cosma mentioned, Patty, participating from local schools, but I spoke to many of the teachers and the crew on the Fafayette, and we were learning that these children are not able to study their own culture within the French lycée system. It's really minimized in terms of what they can do. So the faculty would do workshops after school and on weekends. So this was a special occasion even for the kids to participate in learning about traditional navigation and going onto the va'a and actually sailing out. Maybe you want to speak about wayfinding a little bit.
Sure.
So.
We studied wayfinding before we went there. And part of this renaissance of Polynesian culture had to do with the revival of the double-hulled canoe, which is how the Lapita sailed from these islands. And the reason we know this is that the flora and the fauna were traced from Southeast Asia all the way to Polynesia. And they came about 200 AD. So in the 70s, the last true wayfinder who had been initiated in actually the mysteries, because it's not just like celestial navigation, which it is. There's no compass, there's nothing mechanical. They just do it all by their body and by what they call the star compass, which they memorize the rising and the setting of constellations in the sky. They read the color of the clouds, the type of cloud, the waves. Looking at the type of fish that are present, knowing how close they are to land, observing birds. But there's also another piece to that, and the master wayfinder is the Po, and he's initiated in such a way that once he achieves a kind of deep mystical intuitiveness about how to sail, then he is a master wayfinder. And this gentleman was determined to resurrect wayfinding, and he took a voyage from Hawaii to Tahiti and back in 1976, and it was the first time in hundreds of years that this kind of voyaging had been done. What is it? It was about 3,000 miles. And so he used the methods of wayfinding, and his protege, his mentee, is Nainoa Thompson, who in 1980 did his first solo voyage from Hawaii to then Tahiti, and then to the Marquesas, and that's called the Polynesian Triangle. It's really thousands of miles. One of the beautiful things that he wrote about, Thompson wrote about, was the fact that one night there was total cloud cover, it was raining, he had to find the moon, his men were asking him, which way do we go? And this was his first voyage, and he really wasn't sure. So he sat back and he closed his eyes and he said, all at once a warmth came over him, and then the sense that he really saw this light, which he felt was the moon, and he just said this direction. And in about 8 hours, the clouds broke, or 4 hours, the clouds broke, and they could see the moon was actually that direction. And that's when his teacher said to him, okay, now you are a true Po, you're a master wayfinder.
So let's take a look at the video because our students had the ability to participate in this experience. So the wayfinding video.
Today we are welcoming people from New York and also our kids from Mo'orea, which is great because that's what we like to do, is to share this canoe.
On behalf of myself and all my friends, I would like to thank you for welcoming us in open arms to your beautiful home.
Avec tout son cœur et le nôtre, on vous remercie pour nous avoir accueillis. Je m'appelle Liam.
My name is Kristen. My name is Richard.
In February of 2014, we took part in a whole bunch of workshops related to Polynesian navigation at the Atitia Center in Mo'orea.
En fait, il y a plusieurs ateliers. Ici, on fait de la sculpture pour la pirogue polynésienne. Là-bas, il y a pour faire tresser des bracelets. Là-bas, c'est le tissu. Et là, eux, ils sont en train de creuser pour la pirogue.
Since a very young age, Polynesian children will learn about the currents and the names of winds by playing with miniature va'as called titirainas.
For the titiraina, the meaning is for the kids to learn about ocean, because you will put on the ocean the current. With the sail, you will learn about the wind.
The Voyager Society welcomed us aboard their traditional sailing vessel, a double-hulled canoe called the Fa'afaiete.
Traditional navigation on the open ocean without the use of any instruments or technology is called wayfinding.
Navigator had extensive knowledge of the stars. With those stars, he could locate himself on the ocean. He understood the clouds because the clouds could tell you if there was land nearby, because islands send off condensation. The color, light colors would indicate that there's a lagoon below, so they could find atolls. The birds could tell you how far you are from an island. Our ancestors sailed from Taiwan to Indonesia, and then the Lapita culture continued on sailing through the Pacific, became Polynesian. And the thing that evolved the most in all these cultures, of course, is the va'a, the boat that they use to sail.
Yes, this canoe is halfway between modern and tradition. So we have solar panel, so she's autonomous. When we go out, we took off the engine, so we can use the wind as well.
The va'a can be placed at the base of our culture. When you're greeting the va'a, there are ceremonies.
Fa'afaiete means reconciliation, and that's pretty much our vision, to reconcile ourselves to the ocean, to our ancestral values, reconcile ourselves with our history too, because a lot of it has been totally forgotten or purposely changed.
Reconciliation with ourselves, reconciliation with our community, and with nature that surrounds us. Those are the ideas of our va'a.
Polynesians regard the canoe as the mother and the navigator as the father, and they also see the island as a canoe in the larger ocean. And there are now 7 va'as that are circumnavigating the globe for the next, I think, 3 or 4 years, and one of them will be stopping. This one, the Fa'afaiete, will be stopping in New York. We don't know where yet.
I think they're all
coming together.
They're all
that's right.
coming into
the New York Harbor. We don't know.
2016.
2016.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's
Amazing.
There's also a model of the double hull canoe upstairs. So those of you afterwards, if you want to get a closer look at it, was brought back to us by Mrs. Ross from her trips, and that's up in the top of the stairwell. So take a look now that it has more of a connection to what we've done. So as you can see, there's so much to unpack from these experiences. And that's really the important piece. So not only are the students prepared for what to possibly encounter before they go and getting the background knowledge, and then you're there, totally immersed in these settings, but the important piece that comes afterwards is how do you make sense of the experience? And not only for yourself in terms of your personal relevance, but how do you share that with others? And most of the field academy experiences that folks have done always have this outward component to it where they're giving back to the community in some fashion. And traditionally, we always have a sharing night where we will share with the families, with the rest of the community, the experiences that we had, but it goes deeper than that. And what we're trying and working really hard at is taking these experiences, as I mentioned before, and capturing them as curriculum, or capturing them as ways to share with a body beyond ourselves. So I want to kind of move to what we call, we've all learned the language now, post-production, and what happens after the experience. And I'm going to actually frame this first by starting with you, David, because you played a really critical role in our post-production, our analysis, and I'll set you up for the conversation a little bit. But here's all these, and I will say that Julian and I know Alexis spent hours in the media lab with others, and you've gotten this BioCube, you've pulled it out of the water, you've analyzed it, you spent hours upon hours in Mo'orea snapping photographs. Where does it go from there when you come out of that experience? What's the next stage that folks have to go through to make meaning of all of that data that you've collected?
Well, collecting data, that physical activity is not actually science.
Nope.
It's not until you actually have that data and then you have some idea of how the world works, hypothesis, and you test it. And you use the data to figure out if you're right or wrong, to answer the question yes or no, more or less. So the analysis is the part that really matters, and the part that's, it is very intellectually stimulating to try to figure out how to catch this fish. Or that, how to get this worm out of the matrix of the reef in one piece.
To get it to stay still.
Yeah, chasing a little crab around a petri dish for 45 minutes is kind of my job, but it's also a bit frustrating about the 50th time, So, there are these data sets, and because we record the amount of effort that went into it, how many people worked on it for how many hours, it makes a 3-day, 4 location set of BioCubes comparable to a BioCube that is in one location that a month was spent on. You can, because the effort, obviously the original BioCube is visually richer, but we also spent a lot more time on it. So, but because we know what that difference is, and then there are, over time, we can build data points, and then they become comparable, and then you can analyze, overall diversity, because you can have this enough sort of stochastic. It's not random, but as long as you know that everybody was always going for what was apparently the most diverse spot. Nobody volunteers to do it in the middle of the parking lot. You get this, and we're trying to make a whole bunch of them. It's rather ambitious. Chris and I have this scheme to get 1,000 classrooms to do 2,000 BioCubes in the next 18 months. So we'll see. It may take a little longer than that. But then somebody could compare yours, Julian and Cosima, to one that they did in a different Pacific island, or maybe one in the Indian Ocean, or on the Great Barrier Reef. we have the data collected, and it's about to get posted in a permit, because we're building this little BioCube portal into iNaturalist that's specific, so people can compare different BioCube projects. So we're progress,
Right.
and we're still working on it, and it's 9 months later.
Yep, we are still working on it. So the analysis phase is very important, and I want to ask Julian and Alexis, when you got back here, as tired as you were, can you talk a little bit about the experience of going through all of the photos that you collected and starting to make decisions about what tells the story, and the role that you also had to play in terms of taking information from the island in terms of resources for identification and back to here, and both the challenges and the successes that were associated with that?
Luckily, for my part at least, I'm more of a media-focused person. So a lot of the pairing between the photos and the specimens were done while we were still on the trip. Each of them had an XMO number, so then we could pair that to a spreadsheet that we had that had the species name, and then we paired that to the image. But since we knew that these pictures were then going on to be part of a card game, some of them needed a little bit more retouching and work on them. And I took some of the pictures of the species, but there's just hundreds of other ones that I haven't even seen before. So what my role was just going through the images and then making them look a bit more beautiful. Each of the specimens, putting them on a black background, having all like the dust kind of cleared out, and then printing that. And then every once in a while there'd be an image of one of us, one of the students dressed up. When we did the performance, the second to last day, coming out of the printer, and then, it was a lot of long nights, but I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
David really started us off while we were on the trip in doing the Photoshop on the species and really defining which ones were good, which ones weren't. But you had 6 kids shooting simultaneously, so the amount of media was incredible. And, I'm not sure, we brought it all together. We brought it home. I'm still look at the media and feel sick when I think about all the different files, because if you really ask me, I'm not sure I could get to the right one really quickly. But we spent a lot of time in the digital darkroom with Julian and Rebecca, who's not here, and a lot of late nights in printing all those images, and then Skyping with David on the phone going, this isn't working, this. And then, of course, the card game and that, whole production, which was
So I'm going to take it
memorable.
From there. There's these references made to the card game. So Cosmo and I are going to demystify the card game. This is where my role became much greater all of a sudden. We were asked, a group of students went to represent their work at the BioBlitz, which you saw in the very first film in San Francisco. And as part of that, we were challenged, and I should say the students were challenged and rose to the challenge, which was to take their knowledge of this system and the different anthropogenic forces on the system and natural forces on the system, and this rich catalog of imagery that represents a species, and create a game out of it. That's what they were told to do 48 hours before we were going to San Francisco. And Cosmo, do you remember that first conversation and where your brain went?
I mean, it's one thing to play a card game, but then you are given the challenge to make one. There were 6 students, and of course with Patty, we had numerous discussions. We went in circles, we sat there really late, we were super frustrated. I mean, and then you have Julian, Rebecca, and Alexis who are going through these photos. Some things are wrong. I mean, it was complete chaos. We are also trying to get a presentation ready in San Francisco. It was crazy, but in all honesty, I mean, when do you get an opportunity to create a card game? So you kind of just have to go with it, and you have to kind of just wait for stuff to happen. But it was incredible to be able to create something like this. and to actually go through a process of not only brainstorming creative ideas and how and like what type of audience this card game will target, but you also have to look at the science perspective. Like, is this actually going to teach somebody? Is this relevant? To a scientist, would it be relevant? And I mean, we presented it to the scientists, and you know, they were faults and they were things that needed to be fixed. But I think now we created a really great product that can be used really just to educate people. And that's lovely to be a part of that.
Great. Julian, how about from your perspective? Because I know I called you really late at night a couple times.
Well, you know, we didn't have a lot of time to do this. As you said, it was 48 hours. Normally, if you're making a card game or a board game or something, the art part of it kind of comes last. First, you have the mechanics of the game. Everything is good. Everything's tested out. Then you may have some ideas about art, but then the art comes in last. In this case, everything was going on at the same time. So we had all the images that you guys were able to use. We knew we had this many shrimp, this many fish, this many crabs, but we didn't know how many you guys needed at a certain point. Sometimes you guys had 7 crabs in one iteration of the card game and everything was edited and it was great. Like 3 hours of work getting all those crabs, and then it's like, actually no, we're gonna use 4 crabs, and then do you have any more shrimp that we could use? So it's like just this ever-evolving thing. And then there's so many debates of, should we just put them together in one species? No, it doesn't make sense. It has to make sense scientifically. So yeah, it was pretty chaotic, but I think the best things sort of come out of the chaotic environment.
So I'm gonna unpack this a little bit further. The game was made, the original game, we're on another iteration now, was made in 48 hours. And the credit of the students to be able to rise to the occasion. I think this is a really important piece of winter intercessions in general. And that is the idea that we're given these challenges, and if you can give students the time to focus on it, and that's what they're focused on, it's amazing what they're able to put together. The other key person in this whole game arranging and putting it together was Julie Iden, who actually was the one who figured out how to produce the cards, worked with companies, and as you know, everything we do at Ross has an aesthetic. And David, as well, as the inspiration for the aesthetic in terms of how those photographs are taken, but working very closely, so our expert pool increased to beyond just scientists, but also working with someone in a publishing capacity who could help us how to think about how to professionalize it. And Jen Morgan as well, who helped us with editing, and because there's one thing to say this is how you're going to play the game out loud to someone, and there's another idea about how to take what you say out loud and crystallize it into a set of directions. So we had iterations of the game on the lower school campus and the upper school campus with students playing it. They got feedback from it. We went to BioBlitz, we got more feedback from it. We took all that back, we redid the game again or tweaked it. This went through 3 different repetitions. David came. I spent literally 4 hours one afternoon with David and Jennifer Morgan and Julie Iden, and I don't remember who else was with us, playing the game so that we could play it as well from that perspective with David's knowledge. We were sending cards out to Chris Myers, out to Seabird McKeon, out to people that they knew that could help us identify species and making certain that whatever we put forth was as accurate as possible. And I think what was most interesting that you learn that's so open-ended is the field of science, marine science, and identifying creatures and determining what family, what genus, what species are in is still really wide open. There's a lot of interpretation that's still happening in there. And the most funny conversation that we just recently had with Seabird, Julie and I, is when he said, oh, you should have the license to be more creative with your common names. Just take a look at it and add an adjective in front. That's okay to do. And she and I, he can't see us. We're sitting on the other end of the phone like, no, we don't feel comfortable taking license. Please tell us the license we should use.
Scientists don't really pay attention to common names.
No, they don't care about that.
They're handles for us lesser mortals to deal with.
Yep.
And if it's a green shrimp, call it a green one rather than calling it a shrimp, because then it delineates it from the red one. But the fact is the green one and the red one might be the same species. It's just they had a different diet for most of their life or something like that. So it's a moving target.
It's a very moving target. And I'm sure We have an iteration of the game. I'm not saying it's the final iteration at all. I've learned not to say that anymore. But we are going to share this with you. And the biggest change that happened, and a very special thanks to David for sharing imagery with us that he took, but also the mirroring of our imagery, is that it's a 2-deck game. We realized that you needed that. It's a cooperative game, not a competitive game, although you could play a version of competition. And it's about people understanding what affects biodiversity. And it sort of plays off of comedy of the tragedy of the commons, as well as understanding and starting to recognize species. And it has availability for folks to be able to do research and add to the game through the jokers and the wild cards. So we're going to give it to you. We invite you to play it and continue to send us feedback. And I will say I'm so proud of the students, because this is really their idea and their conception, and it's a very powerful tool amongst all the other things I shared from learning. We're going to end with a last film that I'm going to allow Marie to introduce again, and she will close out our program on the Field Academy Mo'orea.
We'd like to close with a film that will take you on an ethnobotany tour with Hinano. Hinano was our host and the head of the Atitia Center. She also works with the Gump Station, the Berkeley Gump Station. One thing I want to say is that they are really working with just bare bones. There's all volunteers at Atitia. And as I said, the teachers that are struggling, they don't even have computers in their schools. So what we're trying to do is share our videos and help them to build a website. Because they have so much to also share with the outside world that it would be nice to have an exchange that's digital.
The Polynesian, they're very, very humble and they're very respectful of the land, because the land and us, we are one, and the environment, you are part of the nature. It's not that the nature is part of you.
It looks like grass has got no importance at all, but for us it's very important. The grass is important because most of the grass are used for medicinal purpose.
We believe that wherever we're going, the nature is speaking to us.
You have these white seeds, these white fruit that are very useful, because Paumotu, they are fishermen. They are in the water 90% of their time. They are in the water. They love the ocean. And when you are, of course, in the water, you have your eyes is burning a lot. They squeeze one drop going in your eyes, you know, and the other one. And it really calms the pain when you have eyes that are burned by the water, by the sea. If you look at the coconut tree, can you say that there are different coconut, what do you notice? Are they all the same? How can you see the difference between coconut? You look at this one, and you look at that one, for example, over there on the beach. The Polynesian learn how to use different coconut, and all coconuts are used differently, because some of them give really like irregular fiber, and they got many strands going from one. But for like this, you have one that's really regular from the top to the bottom. They're long, thick, and regular, and that's really good for weaving. So each knot is very important. The shape, the color. So for example, for Tahitian medicine, we choose the green one, and we call it Ha'ari Oviri. So it's a very green one, but it has got an oblong shape as well. So don't stand underneath the coconut tree. Yeah. Come around here. Come around here. Watch out. You're gonna pick that one. There. Omoto. Niha. Okay. I take upat on it. Everything from the coconut.
I didn't get that one.
This one is the flower. We call it raine. So on some of the flowers you see the little coconut here, and then you have all the male flower. Huh? Okay? But this is what we call it owo, but very young.
You think there is water inside?
No.
Water coming out.
Wow. Oh.
It looks like an avocado. Not sweet.
Yeah, it looks like
See
an
in
avocado.
there? Would you like to try?
Will it?
Try that water. It's bitter, yes. So we don't.
It's not ready yet.
It's not, yeah, because it's just starting to have water. But I'm just gonna open this.
We're gonna eat the inside.
We're going to drink. We are laughing because here this is the niha. So this is when the stage we see the coconut is full of water. It's full. You look at it, it's just.
Does it taste good?
Yeah, it is good. Taste? It is better. Better than the first one you try. Is it?
Oh, put your mouth up.
Keep the spoon. Keep that spoon. We really acknowledge the nature. We really acknowledge the land first because we know that on this land our ancestor has stepped on it. They work and they kept our land as a little treasure that they have to pass it on to us. We are the caretaker, only the caretaker for our next generation. So, but you have to teach us how to listen to the wind, how to listen to the waves, how to look at signs, how to look at the fish, how to look at the sky, how to look at the clouds moving, how to look at the birds when they're flying. Okay, when you want to grow coconut tree and you want to have a very productive tree, we choose the coconut. We don't get any kind. So you think this is the kind we're going to choose? That's not. This is the one we're going to choose. We choose the one that sprouts right through the middle, here, the middle of the coconut. This is a sponge. Here. Look at that.
You can eat it?
You can eat the.
Yeah.
You can eat. I do believe that if we want to spread our message, is that they become the messengers, and they will work hard to bring this message to the world, that we can live by caring for our land, and we have to if we want to have a better life. And the education part is very important, and I do believe that what they learn here, they're going to make it as a framework, and make it as a tool for every other students that wanted to learn about biodiversity, about sustainability, and they have all the potential. They've seen it. We are all counting on them to be the ambassadors, to make the world understand that there are native people living in their environment, in their island. It's very important to understand their culture. It's very important to look at how they live and how they've been living, and to get the lessons from also these native peoples. For us, it was such a great pleasure to share this knowledge with the youth of tomorrow. And when I say the youth of tomorrow, I say your kids has been our kids for a while, and they will remain our kids. And that was a great experience.
So to end the panel discussion, I hope you can see the ties to the topics that were discussed this week. But the one last piece that I'll remind you of that I think has been really shown to us is what's happening in Mo'orea, whether you're there or not, we all have an impact on. And the ability to, at this moment, take the power of education to change behaviors locally and to teach students how to be one with nature and the beauty of nature and our responsibility towards the natural world, because as Deborah said, and as the movies have shown, affects the cultural world as well. That's our responsibility. And that's what we've been charged to do by Mrs. Ross. And that was the purpose of this week, was to help us all think about that issue of sustainability, not only from the broadest viewpoints, but from the part that might hit you most personally, that you can think about how to act upon that and make yourself into a change agent through education, and how to empower our students to do the same. So before we head into the afternoon, or into the next session, it feels like afternoon already to me, but before we head into the next session, take a moment to ask questions of folks as we scatter about. This information will be captured, the Mo'orea Field Academy will be captured in a curricular document with all the assets that come along with it, so that people can have the ability to play into it, to play off of it, as the case may be, in terms of the relationships it has to the part of the Ross narrative that you tell. And so I want to thank the folks that went on this trip, and I want to thank the students in particular for all that you gave to try to impart knowledge to others, and what you gave to the elders as well. And I hope you enjoyed it, so thank you.